I've had people coming going, I just don't want to be here. I said, well, life's about choices. Choose to be here physically, choose to be here physically or mentally, or choose not to be here. You're an adult.
Hello, my name is Shirley Kavanagh and you're very welcome to the Leadership Discoveries podcast. In this series I chat with leaders across a variety of sectors and geographies who share their experience and views on a range of leadership topics. And today I'm delighted to introduce Cameron Bray. Cameron is a business consultant specialising in building high-performing teams and in leadership development. He's also been Chief People Officer in a number of organisations and spent the formative part of his career in the Body Shop organisation, where he was responsible for the EMEA region. He now works with global organisations, building their own leadership capacity, and he has lived experience in the area of cultural agility, having himself relocated across continents. Cameron, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Shirley. It's great to be with you today.
Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, Cameron. We were talking about when we were planning this that we'll have some topics, but I don't know where we're going to go on this. So it will be
Life's
fluid.
a mystery.
Life is a mystery. It'll be an organic conversation. Isn't that fantastic? Cameron, tell us about your background from Australia to the UK to Toulouse, where you live now. Tell us all about that.
Okay, so thanks for inviting me to join you today. I'm an Australian born and I left Australia when I was 22 with a backpack. And in the backpack was, a few maps, some underwear, some swimming togs, something to go traveling around. And also there was a bunch of sort of dreams, aspirations as well in that backpack. And I was wanting to come back to Australia, but as I started to travel the world, I realized there's so much out here. I moved to Canada and I really enjoyed living in Canada, but it was sort of like a cold version of Australia. It felt familiar even though I hadn't lived there. So I decided to move over to the UK. And again, I was going to be there just for a few years because, I had my parents on my back saying, when are you coming back? You can get a job and all that type of stuff. But then I had the fortune really to start working in a shop called the Body Shop at Christmas time. And I was in one of the London stores and I was only meant to be there for the Christmas period. And my manager at the time tapped me on the shoulder and said, you would be good at training, the way that you deal with people and your personality and your character. And I had no idea what that was. So I eventually got a role there. But why I'm saying that is it sort of kept me in the UK. I started to develop my career and my life in the UK. I got a house, I got a cat, I got things that lived long. So the idea of going back to Australia sort of passed me by, and I established my life in the UK. And I really enjoyed it there. I lived in Brighton and Hove. It's very dynamic. It's not far from London. And it was very accessible to Europe. And because I still had this wanderlust, for whatever reason, even when I was in Australia, I was a Francophile. I loved anything to do with France. I hadn't been to France, but anything on the TV, magazines, movies, if it was French, I was glued, I was mesmerized, I was attracted to everything French. And I found out later, much later in life, in fact, my father's family originally came from France.
Okay.
So there must be something in that. And I came to France to learn French about 16 years ago. And I came again just for a few months. That was the plan. And then I met my partner and I fell in love with Toulouse and Southwest France. And so I'm still backpacking 2 years on. And I always say, I left Australia at 22. I'm backpacking still, and who knows, I'll probably continue to backpack.
But you know what, Cameron, I think you're playing down a little bit that move to Toulouse because you didn't have a lot of French at that stage either. Sure you didn't. It was a really brave transition over.
You're right. My French was very limited. And I have to say, being in the learning business, let's just say leadership and management and learning about yourself and others, one of my most inspiring personal learning journeys was actually that 3 to 4 months I had at the Alliance Française here in Toulouse. because I was learning with people from the Ukraine, from Germany, from Argentina, and I could see all these cultures. The only thing we had in common was non-existent or bad French, but it was one of the most difficult
Yeah,
learning experiences, but one of the most enjoyable, dynamic, because learning a new language, when you're a kid is one thing, but learning it at
yeah,
40 something is something else. And I left those classes absolutely shattered, but actually, I really thoroughly enjoyed the whole experience of learning the language, but learning with other people from other cultures because you could see those cultural dimensions come out in the room. And it was just a joy,
yeah,
actually. So, and people did say to me at the time, Shirley, what a risk. But I thought, I've got nothing to lose. If it doesn't work here, I'll just go back to the UK. And
yeah.
I had to do that.
Well, and that's because it obviously has worked. I mean, you're a very successful business consultant. You've worked internationally, and I know you have a very active practice. Cameron, when I was preparing for this conversation, I recalled a conversation we had many, many moons ago, actually. I think, it was certainly about 15 years ago, when you were talking about building your practice as well around virtual teams and this concept of working with people in virtual teams, which we think only started during the pandemic, but you were talking about this many, many years before that and actively working with international organizations who needed to coach their managers, who needed to help leaders understand how to lead in a virtual world. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because it's not a new concept for you at all. It's not something that's emerged over the past couple of years.
No, and I started realizing this notion or experiencing the notion of virtual and remote management myself when I worked for the Body Shop. Because when I was responsible for the Europe, Middle East, and Africa region, I was based in the UK, but I had teams and individuals reporting to me from different parts of Europe. And also, when I had a short stint as the HR director in the UK, I had teams within different regions. So it's not just a continent-wide issue, it can be countrywide issue as well, even at that level. So I started to experience it, and I realized then that it was really challenging. And when I started to investigate, are there any programs out there, any learnings? There was nothing really. There was loads on how to be a manager when you're
Yeah.
in the same physical space, when you had your team around you. There was loads of that. I would say the standard training programs around managing people around you, but there was very little, if not anything, on how do you do it remotely. And I learned by trial and error. Some things worked and some things didn't. And so when I set up my business, I recognize in that huge space of leadership and management development, and there's so many businesses and individuals out there doing great stuff. I found what I think was an opening in the market, let's just say, and that was around remote and virtual
Hmm.
management. So when I launched my business through my network, I approached people saying, look, this is what I can do to help you and your remote and virtual managers. And literally from day one, people said, yes, our managers need this help. So I focused on that. Life is happy accidents, happy accidents, how I've ended up in France. And that was a happy accident as well. But those small conversations around that can lead to
Hmm.
big things. And having those conversations 16, 17 years ago with those organizations, I'm still working with them today on the whole remote and
Yeah.
virtual.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And I mean, you do have such deep expertise in this whole area. And when you look back, Cameron, at the organisations that you've worked with, and even just the reactions from leaders around it, what are the big takeaways for you? For leaders who are working in this virtual world, some who are not still entirely comfortable with it, let's say, because there is this, sort of the face-to-face piece, the virtual piece. What does it need to look like? What do leaders really need to be doing in these virtual worlds?
Yeah, being a remote and virtual manager is not easy, but it's not impossible. So you have to go into this going, you know what, it's doable, and that you don't have to have your team around you 24/7 to get things done. You can have some really dynamic, effective teams dispersed around the world. I would say it's about mindset, really. There's the behavioral side, and there's hints and tips and techniques around how managers can stay connected, how they can use their energy, engage and coach and give people feedback through a virtual and remote sort of route. But it has to start with the mindset that actually people believe in remote and virtual management. And I know many managers were put into that place because of the pandemic. And a lot of the resistance prior to the pandemic for organizations is that senior management sort of believed that couldn't happen. Pandemic came along, we had no choice, we had to make it happen. And so that mindset that actually we have to have our people around us to get things done, that had to be challenged. In terms of what I would say, the emotional core that is needed within yourself is that you have to go into this with a level of trust of yourself
Yeah.
and others. If you don't have the trust in yourself first and then trust in others, then you will find it a really tricky place to be. And I've worked with some managers who are going, I just can't get over that. And hands up, this is not for me. And that's fine. Then there might be other opportunities. But so I think it's very much around the self-belief within yourself, but also finding the level of trust, not just within others, that within yourself, that you can be successful in this remote and virtual management practice.
Been a lot of talk recently, obviously, in relation to returning back to the office and making sure that people are working 5 days or 3 days or some sort of hybrid measure. And there is a lot of this conversation around productivity being the reason for it, which kind of leads us nicely into this whole piece around performance management, especially in virtual worlds. And you said something to me a long time ago, Cameron. I use it now fairly frequently with people when we talk about feedback. And you were saying to me, look, Shirley, feedback is a gift and we have to treat it as such. So how within the virtual world, or how we're leading or trying to performance manage people where we have limited access and the pressure for productivity as well, how do we make that work in hybrid virtual environments?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. The first thing I would say around just the notion of feedback, and I always sort of present this idea, and I never force people to take on the idea. I just say, just think about it, and just you work it through and so it makes sense for you, and you take the action or own it in the way that you want to own it. The first thing about feedback is when people talk about feedback, it's almost like an event, and it's not an event. Feedback for me is ongoing conversations. So the more conversations you're having with people about what they're doing, how they can improve, or what they're doing and what they're doing well and how they can sustain it, that's all feedback. That step into my office thing is what, sometimes you have to sit down and give people formal feedback, but those conversations at the end of the meeting when you've given something to someone to think about for next time, that's all feedback. So I hope I inspire managers to think about feedback as a series of ongoing conversations rather than an event. And if you're having these conversations, when it comes to the annual process, for example, whether it's appraisal, assessment, or whatever it's called, it should be easy because those conversations are already been had. Where it becomes difficult is when you haven't had those ongoing conversations and you have to sit down, and it makes it feel formal. And yes, there are formal processes in organizations, but the best feedback is that informal, ongoing, that you thread those conversations throughout your daily, weekly, monthly, yearly agenda. And you might have some HR demands of you, which every organization does in terms of appraisals and one-to-ones, etc. The other thing as well is it's about the relationship. Again, as a remote and virtual manager, you have to build that relationship of trust over a period of time. Clearly, sometimes you build trust quicker with some people than others. That's just something that happens naturally. But the more trust you can build between you and your team members, the more comfortable remote and team managers are in giving feedback. Now, when you're on the other side of the world, it can be a bit tricky because you don't have those opportunities to have those interventions, the hallway conversations. And so when I put it into a remote and virtual context, I always ask people, how do you check in on someone, but it doesn't make them feel like they're being checked on? because you want to check in on people and find out what's happening and give them the feedback. You don't want people to feel that you're checking on them, because then if you're doing that, then maybe that feedback may not be received as openly or as easily. So it's about how, getting remote and virtual managers thinking, build these relationships so that it allows those open conversations both ways, in terms of this is what you're doing well and what you can improve, or this is what you're doing well and continue, and vice versa. So it's connected to what I said earlier about mindset, and about building trust between yourself and others. Because I honestly believe if you've got a good, strong foundation of that, then that feedback conversations, those ongoing conversations, happen much more comfortably, fluidly, and naturally.
And what about culture? I mean, I absolutely hear what you're saying in relation to trust. There are many organizations that I come across at the moment who are, looking at culture, who are, trying to reset culture, or maybe have new management teams in or trying to figure all this out. Any advice for organizations who start off with the simple premise, I need to change the culture here? From your own experience, what you've been doing with organizations around culture, what do chief executives, what do leaders need to be thinking of in terms of trying to change culture?
I think the first thing to think about is for what reason, for what purpose.
Yeah.
It's like, what are we trying to achieve here? What is the organizational behaviors? Oftentimes culture is demonstrated through behaviors and mindset. What is it we're looking for? And why are we looking for that? Not just for the organization, but for the individuals, but also for the customer, the client, So start at that point. You hear about cultural revolutions all the time, and a lot of programs and money and time and spent in communications and etc., branding, all put into it. But in aid of what? So I think one of the most difficult things for senior management teams is to really articulate what is that culture. And sometimes they know what they want, but sometimes they don't, and there's some standards that we want openness and we want transparency. We got all these great words, but within all these great words, which are the ones that are going to make a difference to you and your team? And what's the feeling like? It's not just words. That energy like, when you walk into an organization, your organization today, it feels like this. What do you want it to look like in a year's time? And so that's where you have to start, because you can do all this building blocks, but if it doesn't focus on this is the aspiration and it's hard, then it fails. You need to think about that first and work back from that. So a lot of it is about painting the picture of what is working, what you want, and then somehow identifying what are the pillars needed to deliver this culture. And one of those pillars is all around leadership and management, how you demonstrate that. And if you are not doing what you are expecting of others to do, then just don't do it at all.
Yeah, that's very interesting, Cameron. Isn't it funny as well? You mentioned the pillars or the levers as such that we need to keep moving, as we need to keep a culture, an enduring culture, let's say, rather than just, something that's around corporate art on the walls and values and all that sort of thing. Does learning have a place in this whole cultural perspective? You know what I mean? One of these levers that we can pull or leaders need to pull?
Definitely. So next week, in fact, I'm off to Germany to work with a client who is going through a massive cultural change at the moment. And they've made a decision to invest in all their top 200 managers, and then they're going to roll it down into the other management team to really look at what the core behaviors, they've identified these core behaviors in terms of what they feel are needed for the organization to be successful in its next sort of reiteration. And, and rather than just do, the PR stuff, they really want people to integrate these and to have an emotional connection to these 4 core behaviors. Now, what the organization's not saying is that we want a cookie cutter of all of these. They want their managers to go. It's a facilitated program over in a day and a half where they explore and listen to others about what these behaviors mean to them, what's working, and being honest about what's not working. And some people may not believe that they are good at one or other. It's having that sort of openness. But the point is getting managers together from different areas and learning in a collegiate and collaborative way around what's required. So it's not a training per se, it's more of a facilitated conversations around. So I do believe that, learning, facilitation, bringing people into a workshop is part of it. And
Yeah.
I'm actually doing something next week, and the feedback so far has been really good, because it gives people, Shirley, it gives these managers who are under a lot of pressure and a lot of, demands, just space to think.
Yeah.
That's what's missing out there. It's just, where am I in this organization? Where am I in this crazy world? What does it actually really mean to me? Yes, the organization's saying you could read these and they get it, but it's actually, I just need time to make sense, to digest, to process, to own these. And that's where the learning agenda, if the organization's prepared to invest the time and energy into that, then it can be very powerful intervention.
And do you see people respond to that type of activity when they're in the room? Because taking yourself away from those very busy environments into this sort of a reflective type environment can be very challenging. So do you see people respond in that way?
I see it's that whole, that journey piece, but it is in a way. It's now this organization's highly engineering. So you know. And so, with an engineering brain, it's of an organization, typically, not solely, typically it's quite a left brain sort of organization. Whereas when I worked at the Body Shop, it was very right brained, it was very values and creative and, music and color. So
Yeah.
chalk and cheese. And so what we're presenting or what we're working with is sort of like the emotional side, the right brain, the EQ side. So you just think, how is this going to marry? How it's designed is the first half day is about just why we're there, what the organization is expecting, and what people are bringing to the party. And it's sort of a springboard into day two where we look at these behaviors. And generally, the transition is remarkable.
Right.
I have had people coming going, I just don't want to be here. I said, well, life's about choices. Choose to be here physically, choose to be here physically or mentally, or choose not to be here. You're an adult. And I do, even though I said, if you really don't want to be here, what conversation do you need to have with your manager about this? You don't need to have it with me. I'm here to help you, but if you're not here to help yourself in this, or just be open to this, make that decision later. I don't pander to that in the room, because if we all did, then we just wouldn't move forward. And they get it. They get it. And you have to be challenging, but in a respectful way. But I have been seeing the transformation, and at the end of it, people going, you know what? Just thank you for helping us make sense of this, and I feel much more comfortable in terms of my relationship to these cultural
Yeah.
behaviors, and I've got something to work with, which
Yeah.
is what we're looking for.
And Cameron, as you're talking there, I'm thinking about, I know we've a lot of impatience when it comes around, I mean, leaders in general have a lot of impatience around changing culture and want to change culture. And we know it takes a long time. And even the fact that you're upfronting the space for leaders and managers in organisations to really adapt and understand where we're going culturally is really important, isn't it? To do it at that front end as well.
Yeah, and the thing is about culture, and everyone's looking to everyone else.
Yeah.
But you've got to look at your own emotional core in this. You are the culture. You're a manager. You have an impact on, maybe not, well, you do. You're part of an organization, a system, a community. You can influence that in your own way. You may not be able to influence the big one, but if you can influence your part and someone's influencing their other part, all these start to connect. And so, oftentimes, and I'm always ready for, well, the exec committee's not doing this, and they're not doing it. It's all about they. And I always say, where is I in this?
Mm-hmm.
Because you are a they to someone else.
Very good. Yeah.
So where is I? I don't want to hear they. I want to hear I, because you are in this organization, you're a manager and a leader and employees. You have an ability to make this happen. Don't worry about they. They will worry about themselves. You worry about I. And if we all worry about or focus on our I, then we've got a chance to be successful.
So, some great insights from you there, Cameron. And I'm conscious that there will be people who are listening to this podcast who are in the process from within organisations looking to partner with consultants or experts in the whole area to help them in the leadership development space or the cultural space. I'm just wondering, when you reflect back over your interactions with organisations, what should purchasers of services be looking for in a partner? Because you build very enduring relationships with your clients. So what is it that, if you're within the organization, when you're looking out, you're out choosing a partner, what is it that they should actually be looking for?
You hit the nail on the head, Shirley, with the word partner. That's what they're looking for. They're not looking for a deliverer. They're not looking for a supplier. They're looking for a partner. A supplier supplies of goods and services. It's very fine. A partnership is beyond that. It's about a relationship. It's about communicating. It's about challenging each other. I see that as a external, and I can feel the difference. And it helps me perform when I feel like I'm in true partnership. And so some of my clients really understand that notion of partnership, and others don't. I can see and feel, I still do a great job, but actually the mindset there is really key. I go always back to mindset because it happens within. And I think it was my experience from the Body Shop. I had an international learning and development sort of team reporting to me. And I said to them, we need partners. And a partnership, it's that dynamic of that, you can say things to each other, you can challenge each other respectfully, you can build something, you can be creative. I don't want to work with suppliers, even they are technically suppliers according to the procurement department. We will never refer to them as suppliers. We need this notion of partnership. And when you go into partnership from something with someone or somebody's, everyone wins. If you go in as a supplier, the client wins and sometimes you don't. So again, it's around this notion of let's grow and develop true partnerships. And that's why I have been with many of my clients for years and years and years. And it doesn't mean I get work all the time. It doesn't mean it's every year, but I know Cameron's there to partner us when we need him. They could go through they don't have yellow pages anymore, but the internet and choose anyone. I'm showing my age here. But you know what I mean? It's like, it is that notion of we got to, let's build partners. And I much prefer to have fewer suppliers and more partnerships.
Really interesting, Cameron, there. And it's lovely even to hear that definition of partnership really unpacked, because a lot of people kind of use it, and it's really nice just to hear what it means to you. I'm very reluctant to bring this conversation to an end, but unfortunately I will. But before we, close here, before we came on, you were just talking about some of the challenges, what the world is like for leaders and leaders that you encounter, in your partnerships with companies. Like, what does the landscape look like? What are those challenges? And it's kind of tough, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah, I work with large transnationals from different parts of the world, in Asia, German clients, UK clients, French clients even. Although they're in different industries, there's a lot of pressure out there at the moment. There's a lot of volatility. For example, some of my organizations are reliant on the supply chain, and the supply chain at the moment for many organizations is very at risk or broken, just with simple things, the fact that parts have to come from China or Asia around Africa and not through the Suez Canal because of the geopolitical issues in the Red Sea. That means something to people. You can't build things when there's stuff stuck on a boat going around South Africa. So some organizations, but also there's other organizations which they make their money out of consumers. Consumers, a lot of them are facing a cost of living crisis. There's less money going around. There's heating bills, heat and eat, all that stuff. So I think the world has become much more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. It's the classic VUCA. And I work with, in one of my programs, on this notion of VUCA, because we all have VUCA dynamics happening around us. And what's the approach as a manager and a leader? And it's all around the growth mindset. So rather than being overwhelmed and feeling unable, feeling disabled by these VUCA sort of dynamics, is okay, that's happening. Let's just recognize that. How can I go into this in a learning mode, connecting with people, giving feedback, the whole growth mindset mode where I and my team and the organization have a chance to charter ourselves through these choppy waters. So, I don't think the world, and since the pandemic, the world's just a different place and will continue to be a different place. And managers and leaders, there's a greater expectation. Those who have weak management and leadership skills, unfortunately, may not survive. We need resilience in this. There's a whole bunch of other qualities, I think, need to be focused on and managers need to be supported in, because I think this world we live in will continue to throw up many problems and challenges. But there's also personal opportunities in that too.
Yeah. Great way to end this conversation, Cameron. Thank you so much. And, I really hope people who are listening to this conversation get the sense of the energy and the authenticity that comes through from you. I know I've known you a long time. I've seen you in action. I know you've got some great relationships with clients as well. So thank you so much for taking the time out to talk to me. It is always an absolute pleasure, Cameron.
And thank you, Shirley, for inviting me. It's been a pleasure as well.
And I want to thank you, our listeners, too. I suspect you've come from very different parts of the globe and from within different industries also. And I hope that you have found the discussion as insightful and as thought-provoking as I did. By the way, if you'd like to contact me, you can do that on LinkedIn or on shirleykavanagh.com. To our listeners, I hope this has been as useful to you as it has been for me.